Welcome to Women Wanting Women, where we explore topics that matter to women like us. We talk about being a woman, attracting women, and becoming more powerful women by developing more self confidence and always reaching for the next level in our self actualization. I'm your hostess, lesbian love coach Jordana Michelle. And if you're interested in finding the woman of your dreams so you can be best friends who learn and grow together, share dreams together, have adventures together, and share passionate intimacy together, then also check out my website, womenwantingwomen.com, because it's packed with free resources that could help you. For example, there are free quizzes you can take, including one that will tell you what might be standing in your way of finding love, and another that will tell you what qualities the woman of your dreams will find most attractive about you when you meet her. There are free video tutorials you can watch that explain why women do the things they do and how you can navigate the frustrating world of lesbian dating with confidence, even if you're feeling lonely and desperate. There are free guides you can download to learn the secrets of how to avoid rejection, heal from heartbreak, and find epic lesbian love. And there's a free matchmaking survey you could fill out in case I already know the woman of your dreams. All of that is available now on womenwantingwomen.com. And if you want lesbian dating advice from me more often, follow me on Instagram at jordana.michelle. But before we go any further, I have a question. How do you find your first girlfriend when you're inexperienced and have no game? And what can all of us do as women to communicate with more power and self-assurance? Well, I talk about all of that and so much more with lesbian journalist Brooke Sopelsa, the editorial director of NBC Out. You can follow Brooke on Instagram at YesIt'sMeBrooke, and you can see her work at nbcout.com. But before you do, stay tuned for all the great stories, insights, and advice she shares with us here. Brooke, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really looking forward to this conversation. So let's just jump right in. Can you talk about who you are and some background about yourself before we dive into the questions?
Sure. My name is Brooke Sopelsa. I am a journalist. I'm currently the editorial director for NBC Out, which is the LGBTQ vertical of NBC News Digital. So, just like NBC News Digital has a health section, a business section, it also has an LGBTQ news section. And that's the section that I oversee. And I started that about 7 years ago.
That's so awesome. I can't wait to ask you more questions about it. But first, let's just get just about who you are as a person. You yourself are also part of the community. How old were you when you realized that you were attracted to women?
So, probably when I first realized, oh, I think there's something different about me. I would say it was in high school, maybe my sophomore year of high school. And looking back on it, though, there were signs long before that. I distinctly remember when I was in first grade having a crush on the second grade teacher who taught across the hall. And I had all of these, what I called obsessions with old movie stars. I was in the Barbara Eden fan club when I was like 10 years old. For those who don't know, she played Jeannie on the 1960s TV series I Dream of Jeannie. I was also in the Mary Tyler Moore fan club, another one of my quote unquote obsessions. I had a life size cutout of Barbara Eden, the I Dream of Jeannie actress. So, I mean, the signs were there, but when I was, I mean, I'll be 42 next month. When I was younger, it's not like we were learning about LGBTQ issues in school or, you know, were exposed to gay characters on television. So I didn't have the language for this. As I said, when I was younger, I just thought of these as my little obsessions with older actresses.
And much older, mind you.
Much older, much older. And I distinctly remember being a sophomore in high school. And I mean, I think I probably had a crush on like three of my high school female teachers. And I was like, yeah, this is a little more than like a movie star obsession. But yeah, so that's how it went. But there was a lot of denial actually for probably that's when I first got an inkling. But then there was probably denial for another, 5 years.
Do you remember what the nature of the obsessions were? Like, what was it that you thought about these women? Like, what did you want to be their friend? Like, how did you experience it when you were that age?
Oh, that's a good question. Ha. I mean, I think I just saw it as being a super fan. Like, oh, I would love to meet Barbara Eden, even though at the time she was probably in her 70s. I mean, maybe 60s. But, because I Dream of Jeannie, that show was on decades before I was born. So, I mean, I just, kind of looked at it as being an obsessive fan. But then it was like, okay, that was a TV crush on a little, baby lesbian. But I also was very sheltered at that age. So I don't even, I probably at the time was just like, oh, I really want to meet her. But I probably watched every episode of I Dream of Jeannie and the Mary Tyler Moore Show like 6 times. And this is like before DVR. So, I'd be like tape recording it on my parents' VHS and rewatching it. It was like old school binging.
And then in high school with these teachers, did you did you make friends with them? Did you give them extra attention? Did you talk to them more? Did they pay attention to you? How did it go?
Oh, yeah. I think yes on all accounts. I, you know, I mean, I just was like, oh, I love this class. I remember, when a teacher was absent and there was a substitute teacher and, the substitute would show a video or, everyone was like, yeah, we don't have to go to, we don't have class. We just get to watch this movie. I'd be like, oh, darn it, you know? And I kind of think initially I was just like, oh, I just really like this teacher. But I don't know. I don't think I had crushes on anyone my own age when I was, when I was a teen.
I was gonna say, these are all much older women,
Yeah,
and your partner's not Diane's not a lot older than you,
no, just like, well, she probably, well, she doesn't like me to remind her, but she'll always be 2.5 years older than me.
but not 20, not 20
No,
years older than
no,
you.
no, no, no. So yeah, I mean, I guess if I were like a betting woman, then I'd be like, oh, I'll probably end up like with someone like many years older. But no, it's not how it. Actually, I think the oldest person I ever dated was like 7 years older than me.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. It seemed as though you kind of had a grandma thing going on when you were younger,
Oh my
but
goodness. Well, they were young teachers. They were young teachers. But yeah, teachers nonetheless. At least 10. They were probably 10 years older than me.
and so from there, you're in high school. There's something different about you. What then happened? How did it come to be that you took action on these things?
Well, I didn't. So when I was in high school, my group of friends was like the nerdy girls. I mean, I think of us as like cool and nerdy. And out of my high school friend group, I'm the only one who's a lesbian, but none of us dated in high school. Now, mind you, like these amazing friends of mine, they all went to Ivy League schools, became doctors and lawyers. And we were all just really focused on our schoolwork. The most exciting thing, we would go to the movies and to an Italian restaurant on like a Friday or Saturday night. That was like a big night out for us in high school. So I was very sheltered. My parents were very strict. So yeah, no dating. And also my dad's a really big scary guy, and he said any guy that wanted to take me out would have to come to the house and meet him. And I was like, no effing way. I was like, I think even if I were straight I wouldn't like date anyone because my dad was so scary and intimidating. Even now in his 70s he's scary and intimidating. So yeah, there was no dating. But my whole friend group didn't date, which is, now looking back on it, that's kind of odd, but we didn't think about it as odd then. And I think I probably would have been, maybe I would have been a little more like experimental and tried to go on a date with, went on dates with boys, but none of my friends were doing it.
Yeah, that's great. They sound just like a really smart, awesome group of people to grow up with.
And we still keep in touch.
That's so sweet. Well, then how did it happen that you came out?
I'm gonna level with you, Jordana. I was a very boring teen and young woman in my 20s. I did not, let's see, I'll say I was a very late bloomer. I didn't date anyone until I was 24 years old. So even through college, and I went to Bucknell. I didn't know any out gay people at Bucknell. I think maybe when I was a sophomore, I met one or two gay guys. And then when I was a senior, I studied abroad in Rome my whole junior year. And Rome was, I actually came out selectively when I studied abroad in Rome and then went back in the closet when I went back to Bucknell.
But what does that mean? So you just told people that you were attracted to women?
Yeah, I told some people. And then I went back to Bucknell and I was like, oh, I just didn't say anything, and I'm sure a lot of lesbians have gotten this like in the time before they came out where it's like, oh, she's just really picky. She's really picky about the guys that she likes. But actually, kind of a funny story, and I'll try to tell it very quickly. When I was when I was a freshman, and by this point, I knew I was a lesbian, and I was like, I'm going to take this secret to the grave. I mean, that was like my mindset at the time. And I started university at 17. So there was this beautiful man on our campus, and he was a model. And everyone was like, oh, why don't, you don't like any guys, you're not going on dates. And I was like, well, you know what? There is a guy I like. And I was like, I like this guy. His name was Andrew. And I was like, I like Andrew.
Andrew, the male model.
Yeah. I was like, I only have eyes for Andrew. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to pick someone really unattainable and pretend that, listen, I'm not dating anyone because he's the only one I want.
And was it conscious
You know,
that you purposely picked a guy that you thought your friends would assume was out of your league? Not that even, I mean, why would he be out of your league?
I
But
well, I don't know. I think I knew at some level that I was doing this. There was part of me that was fooling myself, right? But there was part of me that knew what I was doing. And we actually had this. Oh, I fast forward. Now we're getting back. This is more than 20 years ago. But Andrew asked me on a date.
uh
I
oh.
guess he heard. I don't know if he heard or what. And I was like, oh shit. There we go. Jigs up. And I just kept making excuses. And I'm sure he thought I was like a total weirdo. And eventually, like, he forgot about me. And then I don't even know what I did after that. I don't even know like what stories I was telling. But when I was a senior, I had I was living with my two roommates off campus, and they are amazing. One of them I've lost touch with, but one of them I'm still friends with. And they they knew I was a lesbian and I was just closeted. And we had something in college that we called the lesbian fridge. And anytime we would find like sapphic images in a magazine or anything, we'd cut it out and we'd put it on the fridge. So we called it our lesbian fridge. I don't even know how it started, but looking back, they were trying to create this like safe space nest for me to come out. And one night, we're all sitting around the table. This is probably spring semester, our senior year. I think it was like nearing graduation. And we had a few drinks, and I don't know how it was decided, we're all going to tell deep secrets. And both of my roommates share really personal things that they never shared with at least no one at Bucknell. And, I was really touched that they shared that with me. And then both of them at the same time turned to me and say, Brooke, is there anything that you'd like to share? And then I initially was like, nope, actually, no secrets here. So then, Brooke, you sure there's nothing you want to get off your chest? You don't have anything you'd like to And I don't know, maybe it was like maybe I had 2 drinks more, and then eventually I was like, "Well, I think I might be, like, bisexual." And they're like, "Really? Okay." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe like, I don't know, 60-40, 80%, 20%." And they're like, "Oh, which way?" And I'm like, probably 80% gay." And they're like, "Oh." And I mean, I don't even think they said like we knew, but I think they were just trying to create this little cocoon for me. But yeah, I initially came out, I think, in college as bisexual.
But wait, let's pause on why. Because, okay, my friends, to the extent that anyone suspected anything, it had to do with me crushing on a friend of ours that I was a little bit in love with at the time. And I didn't know, but they were all laughing at me about it. So it was obvious to other people that I was in love with this person and that I was a lesbian. I wish they had told me because I could have come out a lot earlier and done something about it, but no one told me. I didn't know the joke. I knew there was a joke. I just didn't know what it was. I knew it had to do with me getting rejected by like a friend who didn't want to be as close with me as I wanted to be with her. But in the absence of you crushing on anybody, and that just it was just basically you not crushing on boys, that was enough for them to think you were like, what was it? Because it
Okay. So, you know what? I did leave out an important part of the story. Throughout my college years, there were two friends that I was like very close with and kind of, obsessed with. So yeah, there was that component, which probably is important context. But I also had never dated a guy at Bucknell, and they knew it. I mean, we were roommates and we had been friends since freshman or early sophomore year. So yeah, that was the additional context.
and who were these friends of yours, and what was their how did they relate to you?
Well, I don't know if I want to get into that. I actually don't talk to I haven't talked to either of them in a long time. But I think people can sense. I think we probably were closer, though. I mean, to my knowledge, both of them are straight women, but who knows? I haven't seen or talked to them in a long time. And I did keep in touch with both of them for a long time after college, but now college is more, I actually graduated 20 years ago this year, May 2003. So yeah, I guess it's just like the way I talked about the friendship, focused a lot of attention on them. I think that was part of it, but it was also it was also in the context of Brooke has never dated a guy on campus.
Right, you've never dated a guy, and you have all this interest in these two female friends of yours.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, goodness, looking back on it, I'm like, wow, what a way, it just, I sometimes I wish I could talk to little Brooke and just shake her because it's a lot of effort to conceal your sexuality.
Yeah, and the time lost of when I think about how much happier my college years would have been, how much more fun I would have had.
Were you out in college?
I didn't realize I was a lesbian at all. I had no idea until I was
Really?
23. Yeah. I wish I had known. I did fall in love with my friend. I just didn't know. And then I actually when I because she ended up transferring, nothing to do with me. She just wanted to go home. And during the time when she transferred, I was like sick with how much I missed her. But I also knew that she didn't miss
Ah,
me,
ah.
and she was all I could think about.
Where'd you go to college? I'm just curious.
I went to the University of Michigan. Yeah,
Okay.
and so I ended up seeing a therapist because I knew my friends were laughing at me. So there was the fact that they all knew I was in love with her. They were laughing at me, and I was completely sick because I missed her so much. And I also knew that she wasn't missing me. She wasn't thinking about me. She wasn't talking about me to her friends at home the way that I couldn't stop thinking about her. And so I thought there was something wrong with me, especially the way my friends were laughing at me. I thought I was a stalker. I literally thought that I had a problem because I had had a guy stalk me my freshman year, and not in a dangerous way, but just like he literally flunked out of school because all he did was follow me around.
Oh, wow.
It was weird, but so I was saw myself through my friend's eyes laughing at me, and I wondered, do I have this problem? And so I ended up seeking out the counseling of someone at the health services center at our university, and said explain the problem. I said there's this person, and I think about her all the time. I think about her when I wake up. I think about her throughout the day. All I want is to hear from her, and I think about her when I'm going to sleep. And and like I'm a stalker. Please help. And the therapist, had said, "Well, it sounds like you might be in love with this person." And so that was when I realized, oh my God, you're right. And also I realized that this horrible crushing feeling in my chest, like I would just feel, I was feeling just, I remember that whole summer I had this horrible, deep, horrible sensation, like this heavy sensation in my chest. And I realized, oh my God, that's literally a broken heart. That's what that is.
Oh,
Like, I was like, oh my God. And the songs on the radio say that those heal. So that's good news. So it was just this huge revelation. But so she was like, okay, you're in love with this girl. And then she said to me, so you're a lesbian. And I was like, what? Like, what do you know? I just obviously I need to find a guy who makes me feel this way, the way that she does. Because it just I had never I didn't even know any lesbians. It didn't make sense. I didn't how could I be a lesbian? I never even kissed a girl. Like, are you even allowed to be a lesbian if you don't kiss a girl? And I didn't know any lesbians that were anything like me. So it just didn't make sense at the time. So I just rejected the notion until I was and then I fell in love with another girl when I was in law school. And that was when I realized, like, okay, it's time to, instead of saying I need to find a guy who makes me feel this way, I was ready to say, okay, it's clearly not guys who make me feel this way. And so then I came out.
I'm just thinking, hearing you talk about your friend. I remember distinctly. This was my senior year, and one of the friends that I had a crush on was a couple of years older than me. So my senior year, she was gone. But then there was this other friend, and I remember we were so close, and then she got a boyfriend, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my goodness, I thought my world was falling apart. And I distinctly remember saying to her, I wish there was no such thing as romantic love and everyone can just be friends. And she was like, that's so sad. And looking back on it, I'm like, God, what a sad thing for me to have been thinking at that time. But I think a lot of us probably go through this. And I'm hoping less so now, because even people who live in less accepting areas, they still have the internet, they still have television. I mean, there are queer characters on almost every TV show now.
Absolutely.
We didn't have that.
Nothing like that.
How are you? How old are you? I'm just curious. Are we around the same age?
I'm 43. I'm a year older than you. Yeah.
Oh, we're about the same
Yeah.
age. Yeah, there was nothing.
No, almost nothing at all. So how then did you end up, how did you start dating women? What, what did you do and how did that work? Like, how did you enter the community? What did you start doing? You said you were 24 years old. Were you dating women before that and just not telling people, or, how
No,
did it start
no,
that you,
I was dating no one, which, is, I mean, I could kind of laugh about it now, but it was pretty sad then. I had a lot of shame. I also grew up very sheltered, and I think I was probably immature for my age. So I didn't date anyone until I was 24. But when I started dating someone is not necessarily when I entered the community, so to speak. Because when I was probably 21, or maybe I had just turned 22 when I discovered Meow Mix, the long since shuttered lesbian bar
unlike Suffolk and,
on the Lower East Side.
yeah,
Yeah, it was on East Houston and like
in
Suffolk
Suffolk,
or
yeah.
something. So I was living in New Jersey at my parents' house at the time. So, I was a real catch then, as you can imagine. I was taking the bus from New Jersey, not just one bus, actually, a bus from New Jersey to Manhattan, then at least two subways to get to the Lower East Side, because you know how much of a pain in the butt it is to get to the Lower East Side from anywhere. And I would go by myself to Meow Mix on Thursday nights, which was Gloss Night, which was their lipstick lesbian night. And I started doing that probably at 21, maybe 22. And that's actually how I met my very first lesbian friend, who I'm still good friends with to this day. She was a bartender at Meow Mix. And I used to come in my turtlenecks and blazers after work on a Thursday. And, I think she took pity on me and like would just talk to me. And we've been friends ever since. So she was my first lesbian friend. But I was so I had never dated anyone. I I had no game as, 21, 22-year old Brooke. So even though I would go there, I would talk to people, but I didn't date anyone. And a lot of my straight friends got dragged there to Meow Mix. And a special shout out to my friend Luciana. a straight lady who's probably been to more lesbian bars than most lesbians because, yeah, I didn't have any lesbian friends at the time. But I did meet my first lesbian friend at Meow Mix, but it would be another like 2 years before I dated anyone, and someone I met at work.
Meow Mix was also the first lesbian bar I ever went to. I knew about
Ah,
it because
nice.
of the movie Chasing Amy.
I wonder if that's how I knew about it. Well, what was that movie? 1998, 99?
Yeah, in 1997, 1998, 1999, in that area.
Yeah.
And I then once was in the city and I saw it. I was like, oh, that's the bar. And so I was with my guy friend that night and I made him come in with me. And then I took myself there alone a bunch of times. This is before I even knew I was a lesbian. I knew I was very curious about this. But yeah, so go Meow Mix, shout out.
It was 1997. I just looked it up.
Boom. Yeah. I have a funny story about Chasing Amy. I saw it with my high school boyfriend. And I remember watching it and just being like, oh my God, 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 oh my God. And I was freaking out. I remember just freaking out during the movie because I don't know, something about it just really deeply resonated. I'm 17 if it was 1997. And I was finishing my junior year. I had this boyfriend and he went to kiss me when we were in the parking lot. And I was like, don't kiss me. I'm a lesbian. And he's like, what are you talking about? No, you're not. And I was like, oh, thank God.
Like, I trust
Because
you.
I trusted him because it was just like something was freaking me out. Like, oh, that was, something totally just resonated and I was really worried about it. So I was glad when he told me that I was not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
He would know. He would know.
He would know I was sleeping with him after all. But yeah. So right on, Meow Mix and your first friend. And then so how did you find your first partner? How did that happen? How did you find more lesbian friends?
So I met a lot of lesbian friends through my first lesbian friend. I used to call her the lesbian mayor of New York City. So she introduced me to, her crew. And then I'm like, what was I doing for those 2 years where I was like kind of out, kind of going out? But I was just so, it's hard to explain how really clueless and immature and sheltered I was. I actually met a couple at Meow Mix, a man and a woman. I was so sheltered, I did not even realize that they were trying to pick me up. And then I just became friends with them. And I'm like, I years later I was like, oh my God, they were trying to pick me up. Oh my God, that's how I met them. But I mean, the first time I ever got drunk was at a family barbecue when I was like 17 after I graduated from college. You know, I didn't have a normal young adulthood. I had a very sheltered young adulthood. So I say that just because I think my experience was probably quite different than most people. I mean, at least most people like around my age. But yeah, I was my very first girlfriend was a friend of mine from work who I thought was straight, and things just like slowly went from friendship to romantic territory.
I mean, that must have been amazing after you were saying that it was later in life for you. You hadn't had any partner up to that point, much less
Yeah.
a
And
female.
and I remember thinking like, "Oh, this is how my life's going to be. I'm going to marry the first person I date." You just like think it's everything's forever. So yeah, I remember at 24 being like, "Well, this is it. My search is done." But yeah, I don't remember how long we dated. Maybe a year, maybe two. But then, as first relationships go, was just really not the right fit. But, you know, I have some lovely memories.
Absolutely. You still friends?
You know what? She's probably the only girlfriend I've ever had that I'm not still friends with.
Oh.
Interestingly. Yeah.
And it's interesting because you started as friends.
I know. I know. It's curious how that worked out, but I think there was, I started dating someone else quite soon after, and I think there was probably a lot of resentment. And I also was probably a bit immature to, every other breakup has been very mature, I guess. And there's like that cooling off period. And then, after a while, you could become friends. But yeah, it didn't work out that way. But I think I could safely say I'm friends. I mean, not best friends, but I have friendships with everyone else I've dated.
That's really nice. So, do you have any thoughts about making friends in the lesbian community? Do you have any thoughts about dating in the lesbian community? What are some insights you have from your experience?
It's interesting. I have a few different friend groups, and I love to mix my friend groups. But for the most part, I have certain friends that I do some things with, certain friends that I do other things with. And I feel so privileged to have made an amazing group of lesbian friends. And interestingly, most of my lesbian friends work in my same field. They're
Lesbian journalists. Yeah.
lesbian journalists, and they've really been they've really been my rock because I, I think this is many professions may be like this, but I think for journalists, especially when I work in LGBTQ journalism, and it's very personal to me, and my personal life and my professional life are very intertwined. And my lesbian crew of friends, they've just been my rocks, my professional muses. They give me so much support and strength. I don't know what I would do without them. And I didn't make any lesbian friends until I was well into adulthood. And I feel very thankful to have that crew. And I'm trying to think where I met all of them. My very first lesbian friend, who I'm still friends with, I met at a lesbian bar.
The bartender,
The bartender,
the
yeah,
mayor.
the lesbian mayor slash former bartender. She's not a journalist though, but she works in media and marketing and art direction. But one of my other lesbian BFFs I met at work. We used to lead NBC's LGBTQ employee resource group. One of my other lesbian besties, we met through our former coworkers who were partnered with each other, a lesbian couple. So yeah, I think I get so much out of all of my friendships, but with my lesbian group, there's just this, we have a similarity that I don't have with my other friends, and it's I just kind of a different level of friendship. Not necessarily better or, but it's just different. I can talk to them about things that my straight lady friends, my gay guy friends just don't understand. And I feel thankful for that. And also thankful that I have friends that are sort of my professional muses. And I don't know if it's like that in other fields, but in my field, which is journalism, which I feel like is a creative field in many ways, but I feel like it's important to have those people that inspire you. Anytime I meet up with them, I'm like, oh my God, I feel a renewed sense of energy. And I wish I could articulate it better as to why. But, for people that are looking to form their sapphic friend circles, I'm thinking where I would go to meet friends. I mean, listen, lesbian bars, right? And there have been, and we've reported on this at NBC News, there have been several new lesbian bars that have opened up since the pandemic. I think a dozen across the US, several in New York, the Bush in Bushwick, Brooklyn, um, Mary's Bar, which is in Greenpoint, I believe. So those are amazing spaces to meet other women. And it doesn't have to be just for romantic connections. I have a partner, and I remember I went to Mary's Bar not too long ago with my lesbian crew, and we met some lovely women who were like, "Yeah, we got to hang out." I think I'm Instagram friends with them, and you know, we'll plan something. But there are also, things outside of bars, like um, the Ripped Bodice, the new romance bookstore in Brooklyn, and now these are very New York based things, but I think these are also things that can translate into other cities. But the Ripped Bodice, which is a romance bookstore, just opened in Brooklyn. There's one in Los Angeles. I believe it's queer owned. And they just started a queer book club, and they have an in person meetup once a month, um, for queer romance books. And I'm like, that'd be a very cool place to meet other queer women, whether for romance or companionship.
And if you're not in New York, then that's such a great idea to start to go to a local bookstore and bring up the idea of you starting
Yeah.
a queer book club with queer romance books.
And there are LGBTQ interest groups all over the place. I mean, I live in New York, so and I've always lived in New York or outside of New York. But you can join a queer cycling group or a queer knitting group.
Or start one if it doesn't exist.
Exactly. So I think that's a great way to meet like-minded people. It may, depending on where you are, if you're not in a huge city, it may take some research to find, or you can create your own. But I also think it's easier to find that stuff now. I mean, when I was in my early 20s, A, I don't think there was as much. B, I don't think it was as easy to find.
Yeah. And if you start one, put it on meetup.com or other
That's right.
community organizing groups because people go looking those places and there'll be other people in your city who want to find something like that. And if you start something like that it won't just help you, it'll help everyone around you. So if you're not in New York City, I think that's all such great advice. Do you have any thoughts on advice about dating? Like you ended up, finding an amazing partner. Do you have any thoughts on for anyone who's single and frustrated?
I do. A few thoughts. One is, if you're single and happy, there's nothing wrong with that. I know there are people who feel pressured to be coupled up, but some people are perfectly happy not being coupled up. I found with myself personally, and I think with a number of friends of mine, when you are happy and you feel whole, that is the time that you are ready to meet someone. There have been times in my life where I've not been happy, I've not felt whole myself, and I've tried to meet other people. I've tried to meet someone, date people, and those are not the best times to form lasting, healthy relationships. I I think if you are looking for something long and lasting, make sure you yourself are in a good place. Make sure you are someone who would be a good partner. And I think you have to be a good partner in order to find a good partner. So when I met Diane, I chased her for 6 months. I don't know if I ever shared this story with you or if Diane ever did, but I like to remind her that I shamelessly courted her for 6 months. But when she and I first met, I was in a good place, but not a great place. And, we kind of casually dated. But I think when we started dating seriously and Diane was open to a serious relationship, I think it was when she was ready, but also I think it's when I was finally in a great place. I felt like I was whole and I was able to be a good partner. And I feel like that was when she sensed that I would be someone that she could seriously date.
Yeah, you felt like a better match at that point. I want to dive a little deeper into that to go from not being in a great place to being happier, more whole. How did you do that? And for someone who's not in a good place and that feels unattainable, what are some thoughts you have on that? Outside of the obvious of just seeking therapy, were there other things that you did, practical advice?
That's a good question. When I first met Diane, I had actually just been laid off from the Huffington Post. And it was a weird time in my life because I had never not had a full time job since I was like 22 years old. I met Diane when I was 34. And it was the first time in my life where I didn't have like a 9 to 5. And it was an interesting period of my life because I had a lot of time to reflect. And one thing I realized was my sense of self worth was so tied into my job that it was unhealthy. Because when I didn't have a job, I felt like I had no self worth. And I really had to work on that because at any given moment, we can't depend on anything external to define us and to give us our sense of self-worth. And I realized that I had been doing that. And I had a real period of reflection where I had to think about who is Brooke without being a journalist at XYZ. And it took some time to figure out, but that was part of it, separating who I am from what I do.
And so what were some of the things you called upon? Like, what were some of the things you were able to, if it's not what you do, what was it? Is it that you're a good daughter, that you're a good friend? Is it none of those things? Like, where did you source it from, if no longer that?
I'm an empathetic person. I'm a good friend. I love my family. I love spending time with my dog. I'm a lifelong learner. I realized I had a lot to offer without what I did from 9 to 5 or, 8 to 7, whatever work days, however long our work day stretches. And now I actually, I take a lot of pride in my work, but I really try to separate myself from my work a lot more. And I've done that over the past 7 years.
Did you make lists? Like, let's just say anyone sitting here listening to this and either doesn't have a job or self-worth a little too tied up in their career. Do you recommend like making a list of all the things about you that make you a good human outside of your work? Like, is that something you did?
I mean, I think that's a great idea. I I am a fan of lists. I did not do it in this for this particular instance, but I remember when I was at one of my lower points, and this was not long before, this is probably a year before I met Diane. I remember making a list of things that I enjoyed doing, things that made me happy. And I think I've lost that list, but for a long time I kept it with me. And looking at it was always a sense of joy because sometimes you forget, like things that just bicycling on the West Side Highway bike path in Manhattan, oyster happy hours.
Hot showers and puppies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So I think lists are great. And I wish in this instance I would have thought to make a list.
When I've been depressed, I've made the list of things that make me happy. It is a really good activity and helps with your own gratitude, right? So it's like you're having a down moment, and to affirmatively make that list, it's very life affirming.
Yeah.
So one of the main ways that you think you went from being in a not great place to being in a better place is to really defining your self-worth outside of your career. And do you think that was the main thing that kind of changed for you, that made you ready for the relationship you have with Diane?
I think so. I don't think she was ready for anything serious. And we decided to spend time as friends and just get to know each other. And then things sort of, the more we got to know each other, the more we realized we enjoyed each other's company. And then we gradually moved back into romantic territory. Because I think when you meet someone we met at an LGBTQ mixer. It was hosted by the Yale
Yale Club.
LGBTQ alumni group.
Love those mixers. Yeah.
And that's actually a great place for people looking to make queer friends or they're looking for a partner.
Do they still have events? I haven't seen any
Yeah,
since
they
COVID.
do.
Oh, they do? I love that group.
And I've actually recommended them to some of my single friends. Come to think of it,
Are they national, or are they just in New York?
no. Well, I have no idea because these events are planned by the New York City chapter, so they might be planned by other chapters. But I have a feeling that the New York City chapter is particularly active.
And just for anyone listening, even though it's called the Yale Club, neither Brooke nor I went to Yale. It's very open, very inclusive, and it just tends to
Anyone can
be,
go.
yeah, anyone can go, and it tends to attract a lot of more mature, not it's not like a young crowd. It's mature, professional,
Yeah, I would say very
age diverse, and I would say it always tends to be really friendly, welcoming. Not, not a cliquey environment. Very
No.
welcoming, warm. Yeah, very cool. So that's where you met Diane. I didn't know that. That's sweet.
Yeah, that's where we met. And I think sometimes when you meet someone in an environment like that and you want to spend time with them, the default is okay, it's a date. But I think we were probably just in points in our lives where it was better to get to know each other first without that pressure. So that's what we did. We kind of spent time together as friends, and the more we got to know each other, the more we realized that we were compatible romantically. So, yeah.
That's so great. My only fear, if I was going to give advice to someone, I wouldn't want them to be friend zoned because I think that also can happen.
Yes, absolutely.
What is some advice for if you're going to go that route to keep it flirtatious, to keep it something? I don't know. Did you keep it flirtatious? Like, how do you do what you did and not have it be friend zoned?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's probably a certain expiration date on I think maybe after 3 months of hanging out and getting to know each other, maybe at that point you'd sort of gauge whether this has potential for something romantic.
And were you like holding your back from wanting to make out with her? Like, was there?
Oh, I was for sure. But, I
So you're calling it friendship, but it sounds like it was very loaded with sexual tension, and you guys were just sort of
well,
hanging
on my
out with.
end, I don't know about Diane's. How can I, Diane's so private. I don't want to say too much, and then all of a sudden I'm in the doghouse.
No, no, we don't want that. I'll be in the doghouse too then.
I I think the timing wasn't right for Diane, and I think I probably had to prove to her that I was relationship material. I will say, I the first time I met Diane, I was like, my search is over. This is the woman for me. And I've never had that happen to me before. I had always been like the slow burn kind of person. And for Diane, the opposite. She said that she usually knew right away when she liked someone. And I wasn't used to that kind of dynamic. So Diane likes to say, "Oh, Brooke has never been rejected before." So she just was like, "Oh, Diane can't not be interested. I just need to, wait it out." But I don't know. I just felt like there was something there that maybe I wasn't in the right place and maybe Diane needed time. But if we got to know each other, then things would work out. So I kind of, I said, "Hey, let's just be friends and see." And then it all worked out. And it very well could not have. I actually had a couple friends of mine say, "Hey, Brooke, I don't think she's that into you." But I mean, 7 years later,
I'm so glad it worked out.
7 years later,
I might have been one of those people giving you bad advice because I
maybe.
tend to tell
Oh yeah, I mean,
people.
I was just, I mean, I was shameless, but I mean, I didn't. I let Diane take the lead when we were like hanging out as friends. I was like, Diane can take the lead. I'm just going to be waiting in the wings. We can hang out as friends. But I mean, I think for some people there is, ending up in the friend zone. But look, some people are friends for years and then they get together romantically. I mean, I will actually know that my first girlfriend that happened. We were friends. And then, I never thought I could feel anything romantic for her and it happened. So life could be unpredictable.
But did she like you the whole time and you knew she liked you the whole time?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think either of us saw it coming.
And then it just came on?
Yeah, I guess well, then things were building up for a couple months, but we had known each other for probably a year before that.
It's cool. All right. Well, I want to just, I don't want to have a whole conversation without getting some more great stuff about the content you're creating with NBC. So let's get back to that.
Yeah, and sorry, my professional life is probably more exciting than my romantic life. So,
I love learning about people's relationships and how they happened and how they got themselves in a place to be ready for them. So I think it's the most interesting stuff. But yeah, getting back to your work, like what are some things that you recommend people checking out that you've worked on?
we recently published an article that I absolutely love. It's actually a multimedia story. So, an article, a video, and an interactive map about the renaissance of lesbian bars. So, in the early days of the pandemic, we reported, and we were the first to report, that there was a dearth of lesbian bars left in the United States, and a number of them may not survive the pandemic. And I think at the time we had counted maybe like around 20 lesbian bars left. And then our article went viral and it was covered by a number of other places. We'll fast forward several years. and a few of my colleagues and I were talking about a few new lesbian bars that popped up, and we had reported on a couple of them. Nobody's Darling in Chicago, a women's sports bar in Portland, and then one of the young women that works on the photo team at NBC shared with me that there were actually a few new lesbian and lesbian-ish bars that opened up in New York City, and I didn't even know about them. So we're like, there's something here, and I think it may be national. So we had a little team together and we researched, and we found that there's probably now about 35, 36 lesbian bars across the US. At least a dozen of them have been open since 2020. And I mean, we're talking like that's a what, 50% bump in lesbian bars. And now we're not near the estimated 200 lesbian bars that there were in the 1980s, but still, I mean, this is a surge, and there's a renaissance here.
Do you know why?
So I think there are a few reasons. I think that most people didn't know how few lesbian bars there were in the US, and I think our reporting helped ignite that knowledge. And I think there were some business owners who were like, hey, why don't we start something like this? I also think in this political environment, people are realizing there's more of a need for safe queer spaces. I think you're especially seeing that in red states. A new lesbian bar opened up in Florida. I think it's called the Ladies Room. I forgot the city it's in, but new lesbian bars in Oklahoma. So you're seeing this in red states. I mean, as well as New York City. I mean, and in Chicago, Nobody's Darling. So I do think there are a few reasons why. And also we noticed, and this article explores this, that both the new bars and the existing lesbian bars have sort of evolved into this more expansive version of a lesbian bar. So even Henrietta Hudson's in New York City,
I was just going to say that. It's like a cafe now
they
or like a restaurant sort of thing right now.
but their branding also, I think now their branding is a queer bar built by dykes. So instead of a lesbian bar, a queer bar, but built by dykes. And in the article, we have an interactive map of all the bars. We also include their taglines because of a lot of the taglines are, are indicative of this new, more expansive view of the lesbian bar.
That's really interesting. I think my understanding was a lot of the reason why the lesbian bars had closed was because queer women weren't getting out and frequenting them as much. Has that changed? Has that improved in terms of patronage by our community?
So I don't think we're going to see the numbers of lesbian bars that we've seen decades ago. I think social media has changed that. Now, if the most efficient way, if you're a woman who loves women, to meet another woman,
Swipe.
yeah, exactly, is probably online. So I don't think we're going to get back up to the 200 or so bars of yesteryear, but maybe it overcorrected, right? Maybe we left too few, and there was a need. I think there was a need for more. I mean, Cubbyhole in in Manhattan, you could barely walk in the door there on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night. It's jam packed. So I think there's definitely a need. I think also with the reporting on the dearth of lesbian bars and then the Lesbian Bar Project that launched shortly after our article, and they actually included our article when they initially launched. I think there was this kind of renewed support for lesbian bars. But I think the pendulum probably swung too much in the other direction. And I think 20 left around the country was just, there was an underserved population. But I also think now with the new, more expansive queer women's bars, I think now they're casting a wider net in terms of the clientele.
Yeah, it's so great. And more people are identifying as queer. So if it's not only lesbian, but it's more queer, there's definitely, it expands.
Exactly. And less people are identifying as lesbians. Even Cisgender women who only date cisgender women are, from what I can tell, less likely to identify as lesbians.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. All right, so a selfish question for me because I also create LGBT content. What have you learned about creating LGBT content from the work that you do when it comes to like sharing stories and messages with the wider community, but also in terms of being representative and giving a voice to LGBT perspectives? Is there anything unique about covering this demographic compared to others that's worth noting?
I think there's something unique about every community. One thing I think a lot of people don't realize about the LGBTQ community is that we are so diverse. We're kind of packaged together as LGBTQ, but a white cisgender gay man living in Manhattan has a much different experience than a black trans woman living in Biloxi. And in covering the community, there are a lot of similarities that we have as an LGBTQ or a queer community across the spectrum. We have a lot of similar political interests, legislation that may affect people across the community. But the lives of the people within the queer community can be starkly different. And in reporting that, so our section covers the whole queer community. And we try to make that our mission and not just be heavily focused on gay men or trans women.
You're not creating content for queer people. You're creating content for the broader community, but the beat that you cover is the LGBTQ, right?
Exactly. So we want to create stories about and of interest to. But at the end of the day, we're the LGBTQ section for NBCnews.com. So all of the stories we cover we make sure that they're very accessible to people who may not be part of the community. So we're not going to use inside baseball queer language. And if there is something very inside baseball, I don't know, if there's like someone refers to like a U-Haul lesbian, we'll explain that. Because, if you're a 70-year-old heterosexual cisgender man in Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin, you may be like, a U-Haul, what? So we try to make our content accessible for everyone. But one thing I have to be aware of is, just because I'm a lesbian doesn't mean I know about the whole queer community, or you know, I have to have a certain level of awareness of the lens I'm looking at things through. So I make sure that we have an internal team and we work with freelance contributors who, can help our stories be more all encompassing and more well rounded, because I don't want all of the story ideas coming from a 41-year-old white cisgender lesbian living in Manhattan. So I make sure that I'm covering the full queer community, and I try to be aware of my personal perspective and my personal lens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's super important. What's funny about queer people is that in so many other minority communities, you're born into it. And so your sister, your brother, your parents, your neighbors, people around you all have that in common. But for us queer people, we find out that we're a part of that community later in life, and we have to come from the populations that we're born in and the
Hmm.
communities we're a part of, and then go and find our way into this other hodgepodge. It's such an interesting thing, and it is what I think it's such an interesting part of our community is how we all come from such different places and sort of get joined together.
And it makes us, I think, so much more diverse. I mean, the socioeconomic diversity of the community. And I think that also is part of the reason that chosen family is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of my favorite parts about when I came out, spending time in the lesbian bars, and just it's diverse in terms of everything. It's diverse in terms of age. It's diverse in terms of socioeconomic. It's just diverse in every single possible way. It is just the most hodgepodgey hodgepodge, especially in New York City. I don't know about other places, but queer spaces here.
Oh, sure. And the experience of people in different, especially people in different generations, the experience of I mean, in terms of generation and region, can be so vastly different.
Absolutely. Someone today in places where it's still illegal to be gay versus a girl in high school in New York City right now, where from the time she was little, she was free to express her gender and her sexuality in any way she wanted. Where you and I were saying earlier that there weren't even queer people for us to, and we were near New York City. You said you grew up in Jersey, right? I grew up
Hmm.
in Long Island, so even
Same
us
thing.
at our age, yeah, it still didn't exist, even if we were so in such close proximity to New York City. So yeah, and we're not even, I guess, technically that old.
Technically.
So just because so many people listening to this are also just trying to make their lives better for themselves in every way, just because you're someone who's worked in media for so long, what have you learned about communicating with others and getting a message across that could help anyone listening be more effective in their life and their relationships and their jobs?
One lesson that I think may translate when you're communicating with, whether you're writing an article, whether you're telling a story, I think people like to hear about other people. They like anecdotes. So when you're reporting on an issue, whether it be monkeypox or LGBTQ poverty, the stories resonate with people more when you include stories about real people and you include anecdotes. So that may be a useful communication tool that, doesn't just apply to journalism.
So anytime you're trying to make a point across, if you finish that point with, let me tell you a story or let me give you an example, and then you tell.
I I mean it depends on on the room that you're in, but I think stories about real people, I think examples, anecdotes, I think that resonates with people more. And of course, it's going to depend on the circumstance. You can't always throw in an anecdote, but I think that's helpful. I also, with news, we like to include all sides of any particular issue. So, and not to say that we need to give all sides of every issue equal room in the story or equal time when we're talking about something. But if we're writing something about a bill, I think, was it this year or was it last year? I think it was this year. The state of Iowa had two bills seeking to roll back same sex marriage rights. And we wrote about that. But we also want to include something from people that propose these bills. Like what are they thinking? Why would you propose something like this?
Right, because otherwise the context makes no sense. It just seems evil and out of place
Exactly. Like, oh, this is an evil bill.
where most people do have their reasons, from in their own internal logic, it makes sense to them. So we'd want to know why.
So even if you know someone is not going to agree with someone's point, share with them what people on the other side are saying. I mean, that's sort of a cardinal rule of journalism. And I think that's different from, you have to have both sides equally in a story.
No, but I think no matter what we believe, if we understand why people believe the opposite, it only helps us be smarter in our own belief why we believe this way. Because if we don't know why people believe the other way, then there's a chance that if we heard that other way, we might believe it too. Whereas if we know all the sides and we still come down on our own side, we have a more informed position.
Exactly. I don't know if that's what you were going for when you asked the question, but that's what came to mind.
Yeah, no, exactly. Just communication, any communication techniques are valuable, and I think those are really good ones. Whenever you're trying to teach someone something, if you can tie it to an anecdote about a person, it'll help the other listener hear what you're saying more and internalize it more. And if you're explaining an issue, you'll probably help the listener be more informed if they can understand what everyone thinks about it and why. Yeah, I think those are great pieces of advice.
And actually, this is a connection to dating. So one of my best friends, part of my lesbian crew that I mentioned earlier, her name's Jillian, and she actually works with me at NBC now. So she's a journalist, and She's now married to a lovely woman. But when we were both single, we used to talk about how when we went on first dates, the best way to not get nervous was to pretend that we were interviewing someone for an article. So we would just like, I mean, when I went out, I'd just, I'd kind of ask people questions about themselves and let them go from there. I'm like, I could talk to anyone if what I'm doing is just kind of interviewing them. So, there's journalistic skills at work in the dating world.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of asking someone else questions when you're nervous and then just letting your own curiosity, because if you're curious about someone, genuinely curious, and you genuinely give them the space to talk, that makes you more interesting to them. I don't know that, I think maybe some people might think, I think the idea like, oh, I feel like I'm at an interview might be not a positive thing that people might say at a date. So, but I do think that the energy of curiosity.
Well, you make it seem fun and interactive.
Totally. The energy of curiosity, the energy of caring what the other person's saying, of you really just wanting to know who doesn't want to be in a conversation with a person looking at you, wanting to hear from you, wanting to know what you have to say, being curious, being engaging. So I mean, asking good questions is one of the best ways in the world to be engaging. So that really is great advice for dating for sure. You work with a lot of women, right?
I do. I do. And actually, I would say NBC News Digital is, and maybe it's 50-50. I'm not totally sure. But my unit, so the teams that cover, we call ourselves the diversity vertical. So there's NBC Out, that's the team that I run, NBC BLK, NBC Latino, and NBC Asian America. The editors for all those four sections are women, and our boss, who's the senior director of diversity news coverage, is also a woman.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
A lot of female leaders. Do you have any thoughts about anything you've learned about women throughout your experiences in professional life? Like advice for working with other women or being the kind of woman that other women want to be around and work with and talk to?
I would say I've noticed anecdotally that women, less so than men, ask for what they really want, make any sort of demands. I mean, and when I say demands, I don't mean like crazy demands. Like, I would like this, this, and this because XYZ. I find that men are typically more likely to, share their wants and uh, probably feel entitled to certain things more so than women. So I always love when I see a woman be very proactive and negotiate for salary or go out and share explicitly what she wants and what she deserves. And I don't think we do that enough. And I think it's the way that we're socially conditioned. I do this too. And I constantly say, I'm sorry. I box. I mean, not like I have a boxing trainer. I don't like fight in matches or anything, but it's amazing exercise. But my trainer, and he works with mostly men, I'll do the wrong combination of punches and I'll say, sorry. And he's like, you have to stop that. So now he makes me do push ups every time I say sorry. And it's so ingrained that I keep doing it.
I do that too.
And I notice in other women. And it just is social conditioning. And even in the way that we communicate, in my Slack and email messages, just to ensure that what I'm writing isn't nothing is lost in translation and people know that I'm writing this with a smile. I'll write smiley faces and exclamation points. And I notice it more with women.
100%.
And I try to do it less, but I also think that women are judged differently than men. And I wonder if I didn't include those smiley faces and exclamation marks, would people read my messages differently? Or if I didn't say sorry, would people read my actions differently?
Yeah, and when you talked about, women asking for what they want, if you went around to other women just demanding things, would they be as celebratory about it as you are when you're celebrating these other women being bold? Are other women happy with us if we're more bold. I don't know. What do you think?
I do think we're judged differently on the whole. I think that's changing, but there was a Wall Street Journal article a while ago that talked about how women negotiate less, but they're looked at differently than men when they negotiate. So that's a hard place to be in. So do you just go for it? Do you negotiate for what you think you deserve? But then the flip side is you may be looked at in a different way than your male counterpart. And now I hope that's changing to an extent.
It's a real catch-22.
Yeah, but it's something I notice in myself that I'm working on. I'm trying to say sorry less, trying to include smiley faces and exclamation points and written messages less.
Unless they're necessary, because without them, you might be seen differently.
Yeah, I it's a hard one.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I just want to be really mindful of your time. But before we wrap, is there anything that you just wish every woman could know? And also, please, of course, include where women can go to follow you and find your work.
What I wish women could know. Let's see, what do I wish women could know? I feel like most of my life, professionally at least, probably personally, I didn't have as much faith and confidence in myself as other people did. And I think I held myself back by not verbalizing what I wanted. And this is probably primarily professionally. I always love when I see young people, queer women, I mean, especially women, but young people who are very frank about what they want. This is what I want for my next step. And I never did that. I was always afraid to do that. And I think that held me back in many ways. And I think women, and probably queer women more so, are less likely to do that. I also love queer history, especially sapphic queer history. So I would love to recommend to the folks listening to pick up a copy of my favorite book and learn all about our sapphic sisters. It's called Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers by Lillian Faderman. It is a history of queer women in the 20th century. It's brilliant. Lillian Faderman is brilliant. And there's so much amazing history from our sapphic sisters.
I will definitely link to that in the show notes.
Yes. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, my work email is simply brooke@nbc.com. You can email me there. I am also on Instagram at Yes It's Me Brooke. I'm on LinkedIn, Brooke Sopelsa. I think there's only one of me. And Twitter at Brooke Sopelsa.
And NBC Out, you could find at.
Yes, so we have a landing page, nbcout.com, but all of our news stories you can find on the nbcnews.com homepage. And actually, the story that I just published is right now leading nbcnews.com, but I know folks won't be listening right now. But just, that's how much NBC News values queer stories. Right now, as I say this, a story, queer news story is leading a national news site. But if you want to see all of our stories, our landing page is nbcout.com.
That's so great. I'll have links to all of that. This has been such a great conversation. Brooke, I'm so grateful that you shared your time.
Thank you so much for your time and for asking me to be one of your guests.
Well, I stalked you to get you here about as much as you stalked Diane to get her to date you, but
Yeah. Well, hey, that was 6 months of shameless stalking. I didn't go that far.
No, you didn't make me wait 6 months. I'm grateful. Thank you for that, Brooke. You're awesome. I can't wait to see you soon, I hope. Thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you want lesbian dating advice from me more often, follow me on Instagram at jordana.michelle. Also, don't forget that womenwantingwomen.com is packed with free resources that can help you build your confidence and have more success with dating. While you're there, you can book a one-on-one coaching session with me to get my personal support in finding the love you long for. Until next time, keep remembering that hot lesbians are everywhere, that love is real, and that the woman of your dreams is on her way into your life in perfect timing. And I'll catch you next time on Women Wanting Women.